Hi, I'm Ada Camp, and this is my documentary about 1920s aviation.
Aviation in the 1920s and 1930s had it all. Excitement, innovation, adventure, celebrity.
World War I, planes were mainly used as scouts. However, key tasks that airplanes performed later on were experimented with and refined. It quickened the development of airplanes to make them more reliable, capable of flying longer distances, and able to carry heavier loads. Returning pilots of World War I would support themselves by flying around the country and showing off their skills. They would participate in what were known as air circuses or barnstorming.
Implemented their skills as they traveled across the country barnstorming. These pilots would perform individually or in groups known as flying circuses, showing off their talents and the abilities of their airplanes. Spectators at county fairs and other gatherings marveled at the mechanical wonders. Enterprising people quickly saw that the airplane could be used for much more.
Passenger aviation services existed as early as 1913, and people such as Silas Christopherson would carry passengers small distances over harbors and cities. In 1920, English Upper Coup began offering international passenger flights from Key West, Florida to Havana. He made more than 2,000 scheduled flights and carried 10,000 passengers. However, his business closed in 1924 after one of his planes crashed with 4 passengers drowning. However, it was due to the Jenny Curtiss JN-4D that many pilots were really able to take off. The Jenny was designed as a trainer for the U.S. Army Air Service and taught thousands of Allied pilots to fly during the war. Because it was mass-produced to meet wartime demand, after the war was over, the government sold surplus Jennies to anyone with $300, and thousands of pilots learned to fly, including Amelia Earhart. They were widely used for traveling air shows, carnivals, and eventually the airmail service. June of 1910, Morris Shepherd of Texas introduced a bill to investigate the possibility of an airmail route, but it died in committee. However, he caught the attention of Frank Hitchcock, Postmaster General from 1909 to 1913, who was interested in using airplanes for mail transportation. On September 23rd, Hitchcock authorized the first official airmail flight, piloted by Earl L. Irvington, who was officially sworn in as the first U.S. airmail pilot. Following that flight, 8 pilots were sworn in as aeroplane mail carriers. In the following years, the department authorized many more experimental flights at fairs, carnivals, and air meets in more than 20 states, which helped them convince officials that airplanes could carry mail. In 1917, Congress authorized the use of $100,000 to establish an airmail service. The Army reached out to the Post Office Department and asked if they could operate the mail service in order to give its pilots more flying training and experience. However, planes were still fairly new inventions. They had open cockpits, and the engine was likely to stop at any moment. Pilots followed landmarks on the ground, and it was common for planes to fly low following train tracks. Unpredictable weather and inexperience led to many plane crashes.
The first United States airmail service was begun on May 15, 1918, between New York City and Washington, D.C.
By August 1918, the Post Office Department took over from the Army and hired civilian pilots and mechanics and built 6 planes. In 1919, the first leg of the transcontinental route was developed. In 1920, the second leg was added from Chicago to San Francisco, with stops in many major cities along the way. In 1920, they installed radio stations at each airfield to provide pilots with weather information. And in 1925, they equipped the airfields with lights to guide the way for pilots. Soon, the post office began to look at removing the airmail service and commercializing it, and by 1925, Congress had authorized the Post Office Department to offer contracts for airmail service, and they received bids from a few commercial aviation companies. While commercial airlines initially struggled, with the help from the government in the form of these contracts, they began to flourish. As commercial airlines took over, the department transferred its airways, radios, and lights to the Department of Commerce. The few terminal airports that had been built were transferred to local businesses. By September 1st, 1927, all airmail was carried under contract. Alongside the developments of the airmail service, the increased capabilities of airplanes allowed some daring men and women to begin to break and set aviation speed and distance records, and push the boundaries of what was possible in the air. Many of these pilots were able to capture the imagination of the public and become something of celebrities. Charles Lindbergh was an airmail pilot in 1926 that flew the route from St. Louis to Chicago. As people had begun to wonder about the possibility of a transatlantic flight, New York hotel owner established the Orteig Prize, which offered $25,000 for the first nonstop flight between New York and Paris. This quickly captured the imagination of Charles, and on May 20th, 1927, he embarked across the Atlantic, and by May 21st, he became the first pilot to fly solo and nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean, flying from New York to Paris in a single-engine airplane on a 33.5-hour trip. Upon landing in Paris, he was greeted by a crowd of about 150,000 that stormed his plane and carried him above their heads. He was awarded the highest U.S. military decoration, as well as the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Medal of Honor. His flight gained him international fame and sparked significant global interest in both commercial aviation and airmail, which revolutionized the aviation industry worldwide. Amelia Earhart was the first female pilot to achieve many records, such as crossing the Atlantic. She is known as one of the most inspirational American figures in aviation in the late 1920s. She showed that women could fly just as well as men, and her legacy had lasting impact on women's causes.